Okay, welcome back, guys. Sorry I skipped last week. I apologize. I just got lazy. But anyway, I figured out something kind of cool. I'll show you guys real quick before getting into the code. It's just real simple. It's the same. I can jump and I can move side to side. But the thing is, I hardly move at all if I just tap it. But if I hold it, I accelerate. And then also, a slow to a stop. Instead of just stopping immediately when I release it, there's a little bit of friction. So you can use this in some sort of slippery level, whether it's ice or oil or whatever. Also, the jump is normal except when I'm moving. If I'm moving, I jump higher. If I move a little bit, jump a little bit higher. Move a lot, jump a good bit higher. Max speed, jump crazy. So this is kind of a cool mechanic. It's like the old Mario Bros, where you could see the little meter at the bottom that showed you how fast you were going, and maybe even I can make one of those in the next tutorial to show you whether you're at your max speed or not. And whenever you are, you jump higher. That's a cool little mechanic. So let's get into the code real quick. In the create event, I added fric for friction. Friction is just like gravity is a built-in variable in Gamemaker that I really don't want to use. I want my own friction, that way I can control it in the way I want to control it. And that's the only variable I added to the create event. Now in the step event, all this is the same up until this right here. If place meeting x, y plus 1 obj wall. This right here was our original original way to set up our v speed if we're pressing the jump button. So that was originally VSP equals key jump times JSP, which was our jump speed. But what we're going to do to make how fast we're going, if we're moving, it increases the height that we jump. The way we do that is we add instead of just adding HSP, we have to do it a certain way, because adding HSP, if we're going to the left, which would be negative x, then we're subtracting from our JSP. So what we have to do is we have to put absolute ABS, and that returns the absolute value of HSP. So if we're going negative, it'll return a positive value, whether we're going negative or positive. And then to make it to where you're not jumping crazy high, you want to regulate it a little bit. You don't want to just be moving a tiny little bit and all of a sudden you get a huge jump boost. I just put divided by 2. So the absolute value of HSP divided by 2 added to JSP, and times key jump. And the reason I did put that there is because if we're not pressing key jump, then key jump equals 0, and so all of this times 0 is 0. That way, if we are moving, it's our v speed. It doesn't add to our v speed unless we're jumping. If that makes sense. I'm trying to explain it the best way I can. If you were to add it, like let's say you were to add this plus ABS little piece of code there, if you were to add that down here, then it would, even if VSP is 0, it's constantly trying to add a value to y. So you'll get stuck in the floor because it's constantly trying to add this every single step, whether VSP is 0 or not. So you want to make sure you put it up here to where it's constantly being multiplied by 0 if you're not pressing the jump key. Okay, anyway. Next, we'll move on to our horizontal collision. You want to make sure that this piece of code right here I'm adding to the program, and that gives us the acceleration. You want to make sure you put it before the collision check, because if you're colliding, it makes sure that your HSP is 0 before moving on. So if you were to put all this up here after this, then it would cancel out HSP being 0, and then you would move into the wall and get stuck in the wall. So you want to make sure you do this before the horizontal collision check. Okay, so if hors does not equal 0, so, and remember, hors is the variable that we're using to determine whether or not we're pushing left or right. And if we're pressing both, then if we're not pressing either of them, it's 0. If we're pressing both of them, it's 0. If we're pressing left, it's -1 because of this here. And if we're, oh, I'm sorry, this one. And then if we're pressing right, it's +1. So this here, if hors does not equal 0, so if you're pressing left or right, also, so inside, I'm putting an if statement inside of an if statement. So if hors does not equal 0, and if HSP is greater than -8 and less than 8, it's in just a, instead of putting HSP is greater than -8, whoops, 8, or, those two little lines mean or, just like this would mean and. We can get into those when they show up. So if HSP is greater than -8 or HSP is less than 8, this is the same as this. So it's just a little bit less typing. This means that if HSP is between -8 and 8, and this just means if HSP is greater than -8, or if it's less than 8. Like I said, these little lines mean or, so if you were to put this piece of code in right here, then it would ask if this or this were true, then it would continue on to this. So I'll just leave that little comment there to let you know that those essentially mean the same thing. One's just easier to type and a little bit easier to read. Okay, so if hors does not equal 0 and HSP is between -8 and 8, then HSP plus equals hors time move speed divided by 16. The reason I divided it by 16 is just to make it to where it adds a small increment each step. That way you're accelerating at a less ridiculous amount and you can notice the acceleration. You could just go into your create event and make move speed a very minuscule amount, but either way, I'm just trying to make move speed very small, multiply it by hors, and the reason I multiply it by hors is the same reason I multiply by key jump, is just to make sure that if you're not pressing either, it's multiplying it by 0 and not changing your HSP at all. So if hors does not equal 0 and HSP meets these conditions, then you're going to be adding to your HSP every step that hors does not equal 0. Else, this else here means an else directly after an if statement, because look, this if statement closes right here, and then immediately afterwards I'm asking else, and this one ends over here. So if, pretty much saying, if hors does equal 0 and HSP does not equal 0, then HSP minus equals sine HSP times friction, or fric. So what this does here is sine HSP returns the simply if HSP is negative, it'll return -1. If HSP is positive, it'll return +1. So you're going to be this is the friction or the deceleration that's going to be happening to your character. So whenever HORS does equal 0 and HSP is not 0, so if you're not pressing left or right and you're not moving, then and you are moving, I'm sorry, if you're not pressing left or right and you are moving, then subtract from HSP its sign, or -1 or 1, times the friction. So you're going to be, and since we made friction 0.2 or 0.4 or whatever it was, it'll be slowing you down by that much each step. So it's going to cause a little bit of friction to happen to slow you down to 0. And this one right here is an important little piece of code, actually, because for a minute this whole program worried me a little bit, because every time I would let go of left or right, I would still be moving at a very small amount, very slow pace. I would be moving, and this is just a way for me to, whenever you're at a very slow pace, just go ahead and make it 0. And what it's saying, if you take the absolute value of HSP and then round it, and if that is less than or equal to 1, so if HSP is anywhere around 1 or -1, because we're calling the absolute value of it, so if your HSP is anywhere near 1, it's just going to go ahead and make your HSP 0. That way you'll stop once you get to a slow speed, instead of the problem that I encountered, which was you'll keep moving. It may be a very small amount, but you're never going to be stopped, which is very, very annoying. And then the rest of the code is the same. I know I didn't type everything out in this episode, if you want to call it, like I did the other ones, but I had it all typed out, and you guys let me know if it's better this way, or if you want me to type it out as like a follow along sort of thing. Yeah, just let me know which one you like better. So I hope that this was informative, and again, just to show you what the program does, just tap it barely, you don't move very much. If you hold it down, you accelerate, and then see, it'll slide me. If you notice, there's kind of an abrupt stop. So once my HSP gets close to 1, it just makes me stop altogether. I suppose you could make that amount smaller if you want, to give it a little bit of a smoother stop, but the slightly abrupt stop doesn't really bother me that much. So I'll just leave it the way it is. And also, no matter how quickly you're going, you'll still smash into a wall and won't get stuck in it, which is nice. Again, Sean Spalding, thank you for being a simplistic sort of genius, I suppose you could say. But anyway, also, if you're accelerating, you jump higher, which I thought was cool and fun to experiment with. Also, I know I didn't say this originally, but by now you guys probably caught on. This program I'm using to make video games is called Gamemaker, and it's over at Yo-Yo Games. It's called Gamemaker Studio. You'll find it here on the Yo-Yo Games webpage. There is a free version of it, which I have not done anything that requires the professional version in these tutorials yet. But the professional version is $100, and I bought it because it's flipping awesome. And you can buy things to export to Android devices, iOS. You can automatically export things to Windows. Eventually, they're going to have all sorts of places for you to export to. So, definitely an awesome program. Definitely worth the buy. Or just the free download. It's flipping sweet, even the free version. So, anyway, thank you guys so much, and